Hello and welcome back to the arena. In today's video we're going to be talking about something a lot of new players don't think about in their first year, and that is the historic format. We're going to talk about how to gauge that and its importance within your activity the first year in order to build a more viable historic collection during your second year. This is really a critical thing for the long-term interest and viability of the game. Standard is often overlooked, and I don't want my new players out there to be making those mistakes. So let's dig into it. So what players most commonly and very quickly become familiar with is the concept of Standard, that rotating 2-year set. That can very often be a trap for new players. See, as budget players, there's only 4 sets at any given time that we're interested in collecting, that being the older of the 2 blocks. At the time of this filming, that is the Throne through M21 block. The new sets that come trickling out over the course of this year can be such a black hole to resources that I honestly recommend new players to ignore them completely. Do not draft, do not collect cards, do not open packs there. The reason being is that Standard is defined by a small group of decks, and more so by a small group of cards that fall in and out of favor over time. And if you have used your resources on any of those and then it becomes less relevant, you can't get those resources back. Historic, by comparison, never rotates out. It's what we refer to as an eternal format where your cards are always good. It is currently the fastest growing format because not only does it receive 4 sets per year, just like Standard, there's also direct release sets for Historic that never go through a standard rotation. It currently has twice the card pool and will continue to grow year after year. It is not defined by a small group of decks. Virtually anything is viable within Historic because the card base is so large. So you will see a much larger variety of decks and a much larger variety of relevant cards. All in all, this is where fun and longevity live within the Arena client. So when we look at these 2 sets of facts together, we can very quickly surmise that where we want to be as fun-loving, budget-minded players is the Historic format, because our resources are going to be utilized there and good forever. We are going to encounter a wider variety of decks and thus be able to play a wider variety of decks. And also that most of our free resources as free-to-play players is coming to us from Standard. Thus, the conclusion that has to be drawn is that as we build our Standard collection, we need to have Historic in mind. Because if we're not utilizing those free resources in Standard to ultimately build a Historic collection, we're going to end up in a situation where Historic is going to cost us a lot of unnecessary wildcards. So we have to plan ahead. What does that look like? Something like this. You see, every year Wizards tends to include a very budget-oriented, if somewhat janky deck built around primarily uncommons. These tend to be surprisingly useful and successful based on a high degree of synergy within those uncommons. Last year it was the Standard Gates deck. This year it's the Standard Shrines deck. Basically, it allows you to overtake your opponent through a huge amount of shrine interactions that build upon each other. In this deck, I've also included the Ginger Brute All That Glitters combo to give you a slightly more offensive edge in order to allow your opponents to focus on the wrong thing, and next thing you know, you have more shrines than they can possibly deal with. So this deck list makes a great starting point because it's 62% cards that you already have, which is really a fantastic starting point. The other 38% is draftable from the block that we're worried about, primarily the Throne through M21 sets. In fact, almost all of this deck is from M21, and could be even more so if we switched out our common card draw for the Frantic Inventory option. For budget purposes, I've also only included one copy of the rare Shrine of All, but of course if you happen to draft more copies of that, all the better. Likewise, your rare mana base, I've included all 10 copies of the Temple because I know you have them. But as you draft, if you acquire more copies of the black and green primarily Temples, you can start trimming away some of the red sources. This deck really doesn't need a lot of rare sources to function, especially with cards like Cultivate to let you fetch out your basic mountains. So again, easy upgrades based on your draft and your collection. Now let's take a look and see how this deck evolves as it graduates into the historic format. The last thing you might notice, but the first thing I'm going to talk about, is the fact that I messed up when I made these graphics for you. The Idyllic Tutor is draftable in the Throne block under the Theros set. Therefore, the numbers that you see here actually shift even more towards your budget favor as the draftable percentage goes up and the need for wildcards will go down. Secondly, you will notice that we dropped the Gingerbrute All That Glitters from the standard version because it really was just a space filler for us, and the addition of the 5 additional Honden shrines from Historic make this deck even more powerful as it goes all in on the shrine combinations. Also, the other rare that I have listed as a historic wild card is not really necessary. I included it more just to get your juices flowing and get you thinking about other historic cards that might fit into the deck if you should happen to have them. Otherwise, it's very easily dropped for a second copy of the Tutor or the Shrine of All, making the deck even more effective. Likewise, the common wild card is very easily just randomly opened from a historic pack as you happen to add those to your collection infrequently. All in all, this deck becomes very budget friendly at only about 10% needed for wild cards. You could easily get this down to just the 5 uncommons. But even at the 8 that I've shown here, it is not a bad value at all. You may also notice that I included a single copy of Uro under the cards that you already have. The reason being that earlier in this season I did suggest using Uro as your mythic wild card with the idea and the expectation that it was going to get banned. Thus, you were able to get a copy of that card essentially for 0 wild cards at the time of the banning. Uro is still valid in the historic format, but is not essential to this deck. So if you have it, run it. If you don't worry about it. Just drop in another copy of a card on theme that fits within the deck. I think this archetype does a really good job of illustrating just how approachable and budget-friendly historic can be if you are planning ahead from the perspective of your standard play choices. If you use your draft resources to start building historic decks in advance, this format is really easy to slide into, and honestly, in my opinion, a lot more fun. That being more fun than standard. But with all that having been said, let me take this opportunity to invite you to push my content out to your friends and colleagues if you're finding value within it. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. It really is the easiest and most budget-friendly way to support the channel right now so that we can reach all of those new players coming in. But until next time, I'll see you in the arena.